You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
It is a period of relative peace and prosperity in the galaxy. We're some 100 years from the fall of the Old Republic and the rise of the Empire. Welcome to Fantha Tracks Reaction Chat for episode 5 of The Acolyte, entitled Night. So, to bring us up to speed, episode 4 saw everyone descend on the planet Kofar and basically had a walk and talk type episode. May was heading to cross Wookiee Jedi Kalnaka off her revenge list and was accompanied by the Wish version of Ezra Miller in the guise of Khmer. Whilst hot on her heels and hoping to cut them off in the pass was the Jedi Squad, Strike Force, Team? I don't know what you call a group of Jedi, led by Jedi Master Sal, comprising of Yord, Jeki, Osha, and a number of disposable nameless Jedi, and of course, episode MVP Basil. As they arrive too late to save Kalnaka, who admittedly looks like he was caught sleeping on the job. The Jedi come face to face, or I should say face to mask, with a mysterious dark side Force user, and we're left in a cloud of dust and mystery as to what episode 5 would bring us. So here to help me rattle through the episode in a disorganized and non-linear fashion, as always, is the great nameless one who some might know as Mark Newbold. So Mark, without further ado, take us through this episode. What did you make of it, buddy?
Well, first things first, great intro. I was trying not to smile because I didn't want to put you off. I thought this episode was fantastic. Action-wise, it was the best we've seen for a long time. Some seriously brilliantly choreographed fights, and lots of it. So it wasn't just a few little slapdash bits here and there. It was all the way through. So I think Christopher Cameron Clark is the action coordinator. So hats off to him. It was fantastic. And I watched Rogue One this afternoon, but also was working on other stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there was a more fitting Star Wars thing to watch than Rogue One, because if you got attached to the characters of the Acolyte, like a lot of people did, and I was really starting to get into a lot of the characters, like Jeki, like Yord, and so even some of the nameless ones that sadly were no more. It's going to be it's a tough pill to swallow if you have started cosplaying any of those characters, because they are deceased. They've shuffled off this mortal coil, and other Monty Python quotes. So yeah, I love the fact that it was brutal and unflinching, and the bad guys out there, and there's no apologies. No. And yes, I very much liked it. What about yourself?
And I mean, well, yeah, I thought it was a really solid episode. And I, in fact, we'll get on to when I did it later on, but I did even at one point applaud. So, normally I just applaud out of a mark of respect after the credits start rolling. However, this actually happened during the episode. I suppose one of the things that it kind of did remind me of was actually throughout the whole kind of like build up to like the release of the Acolyte, we had Leslie Headland go out and talk about the lightsaber combats. They did a couple of pieces on stars.com about how, they were trying to kind of get across character and story through the actual lightsaber combat. But Leslie herself was kind of saying that, this is basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is better than anything or on a par with any of the lightsaber fights that you've seen in the prequels. So now for me, I think that the Revenge of the Sith duel was about 11, 12 minutes long.
I'd say, yeah.
And admittedly, that was kind of like a continuous with just two people, but this was probably almost like at least 20 minutes worth of fighting, would you say?
It felt like it. And like you say, there was characters coming in, characters going out, characters being killed, obviously. And you think of that moment with Sidious in Revenge of the Sith that you just kind of allude to, the fights in there, and then you see this, and also the speed of this. It was like Obi-Wan and Maul Phantom Menace quick in places. When Jeki gets going, she was whoa, But Khmer stroke the Stranger, whatever his And he says, we'll bounce around the episode, but he says, oh, I guess you would call me a Sith. But he doesn't consider himself, he clearly doesn't name himself, does he?
Yeah, it doesn't identify himself as a Sith anyway. So yes, and I think that's one of the things that I've seen kind of like a lot of talk online already about, oh no, again, they've just thrown out all of canon and stuff like that. And it's like, hey, let's just let's have this conversation at the end of a series.
Exactly
that's the time to do it. I mean, okay, granted, everybody can kind of like go, oh, well, that doesn't quite ring true, but there's no point just kind of like spending hours discussing it and speculating when we don't know what's really coming. Now, one of the things that myself and you at the same time, and I would probably guess half of the Stars community kind of assumed was going to be the title was the episode title, which was like Night.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, me and you kind of thought it might have been with a K, but hey ho, I say that's half
close enough.
Anyway.
Close enough. Yeah.
And also the reveal of who the masked stranger was, and it turns out it was Kimir and that. And so I know that like I was fairly kind of confident with that. What did you think? What did you make of that reveal? Did it make sense when it happened, or did it make you feel slightly disappointed, or were you expecting something different?
I think last week we both had our own hypotheses, and when it started, I thought for a minute it was Mother Call from the flashback episode, because we never saw a dead body, and there was just something about the way the movement and very slim and muscular. I thought, maybe it's that, because obviously last time we saw Kimir, he was hanging upside down from the tree, sort of thing. But if you're that powerful, that's nothing.
Exactly.
And I think it was worth it when the reveal happened, and it was like, okay, fair go. It was right there in front of us all. If we called it, great. If we didn't, that's part of the fun of Star Wars hypothesizing.
Exactly,
But I think it was worth it for the interaction specifically with May. It was interesting with Sol. There's clearly more with Sol. He kept prodding Sol about dark side, darkness, all that stuff. There's definitely a load more going on there. But the stuff with May, when he puts on the Khmer voice, hello May, and then says, you really didn't see it, and it's clear that he's in the same way that Palpatine wanted Anakin Skywalker but got Darth Vader. It feels to me like Khmer, the stranger, wanted Osha but got May.
Yeah.
They've got their different strengths. When May takes out Osha, she says, you were never any good at blocking. And you think back to the Destiny episode when she's hiding behind her sister. But then there's other strengths that she's got that the other one hasn't. So, it swings and roundabouts. But it was very, very noticeable that whatever was happening, they were both watching. They weren't shocked. Osha wasn't shocked. She was literally watching these Jedi get run through, the two get literally kebabbed on that lightsaber, beheaded. She didn't seem shocked, but boy, they ran when they needed to run, didn't they? They were out of there. They both wanted to just go. So I was not disappointed. Not disappointed.
No. I mean, I think on some level, I think but this is, and by the end of this episode, 2 minutes into this recording, we're talking about the end, but actually it's I think it's almost coming to what you were talking about at some point, whereby you think it is going to be Osha who's going to end up potentially being the Acolyte, and because they switch places and that obviously Osha's hasn't really got a choice in it, and obviously it's May who's doing that. So that I thought it was interesting because you saw it straight away, because then suddenly like May is the one that actually Kimir wants to kill, and Osha's just getting pushed aside, rather than actually he had, I think, a couple of opportunities he could have cauterized her in half and stuff.
Yeah.
So that I think that's going to be interesting, and I think this is where some of the things about this show is going to I think unravel in the next couple of episodes, is that actually we're going to see this kind of plot develop, and maybe actually there doesn't need to be like a big bad behind there. I think it's all there. And I think really the show itself, I think now by episode 5, I don't necessarily think we're going to get anything like dramatically like a big reveal like that's come out of like left field that we weren't expecting. I think all the players on the chessboard now. So
the only thing I can think of in that respect, and I know what you're saying, and I think you're probably 90% there with that, to be honest. And there was a mention in this 3rd episode when the two girls are saying, "We're the only children here," and you saw some of the witches kind of look at each other like, not so sure about that. So it wouldn't surprise me if Khmer had come from that same place.
I think he totally has to, because
About the whole taking over, how he takes over your mind, just like Anastasia did.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
it looked like he potentially had like burn scarring on his arms as well. And also, again, because the way he talks to Soul is quite intimate. Like, he knows something. He knows that Soul isn't being honest with everybody.
Yeah.
And so that could just be him just reading some like Soul's mind. But I think like Soul being a Jedi Master is probably able to deflect that, pretty well by that point. So I think, there's definitely something. And I think really this is what this whole story is going to be about. It's not necessarily about the fall of like the Jedi in total. I think it's going to be possibly about one Jedi Master who's made a mistake, who's tried to almost cover it up, and this is now it kind of coming back to bite him on the arse. And he's now the only I think he's the only one left out of the list now that Karen is dead. So he's the last one standing. So and something that kind of made me think about it was like, because remember like in episode 1 where you see Khmer now on the rocks talking to May, and he's going to say, and knives and lightsabers won't kill a Jedi. But I think actually kind of getting inside their mind and basically dispelling that like level of confidence and instilling like a sense of fear and start getting them to question themselves. That's how you kill the Jedi, And
but don't you think that's a bit like when they started to plot the High Republic? And I think Kevin Scott at that retreat, the Project Lupinus retreat, his question was, what scares the Jedi? And it feels like a continuance of that in a way.
Exactly. It feels like it's kind of that kind of level of question where we're not, everybody's looking at it again from the very kind of like obvious standpoint of where what can literally kill a Jedi, and and this is what we said about like Ahsoka, like lightsabers don't tend to kill Jedi these days. But actually in this episode we saw 5 Jedi
easily
5 or 6 Jedi, and obviously one of those we thought, or at least I thought last week, was Plo Koon. So like, how wrong was I? So
and same. I thought the same.
Unless of course Jedi do survive lightsaber stuff, but then there was quite a lot of kind of like, I suppose for lack of a better term, like red shirt Jedis in the mix to really just make up that kind of
episode 2 Jedis, Attack of the Clones in Geonosis Arena Jedi.
Yeah, totally, or even really, I mean, it kind of on some levels, it like you said, it kind of felt like that showdown at Palpatine's office. It was kind of close quarters. It was like a real kind of melee, and kind of like there was kind of limbs and people swinging everywhere, because like and I think that was the one thing that was quite interesting, was like, I think, was it Yord who said it about like how this guy isn't fighting how we expect him to fight.
That's right.
Basically.
He doesn't follow the rules. Yeah,
he doesn't follow, and it's like, well, that's the first rule of combat, is that there ain't no rules, right? But
that's that Jedi arrogance, isn't it? Because when Khmer says, I'm what you would call me a Sith, but I don't call myself anything. I just want to be me. I want the freedom to do what I want to do with my powers, sort of thing. And you wonder, is he Sith? Or is he just saying the thing that he thinks the Jedi would understand him to be? Is he a Knight of Ren? Is he something else? That he is either a link in a long chain that's kind of bobbled along for a long time, or maybe we find out how he came by these powers and came to this understanding, and just pitching forward whether he is part of that lineage that Palpatine picks up. Yeah,
well, I mean, like we kind of said, if we think he was on Rendok, was it? That makes sense, because again, his whole kind of like motivation, or at least what he says to Soul, is like, I want to basically be able to live my life in the Force, and the Jedi are the ones who are preventing that, which is very similar to kind of what the Witches were kind of saying. It's like, they weren't allowed to teach. He wants an acolyte, and love it when like a character mentions the name of a show in the series, like in an episode like that. That's
like Dennis Waterman doing the intro music, isn't it? It's
that's a deep cut. I have to mind my own business about that one. But
very good. Up to me old tricks.
Tricks. But but so I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, there's that connection to the Witches on some level, but like you said, it's like something we haven't seen, is this whole notion that the Jedi aren't literally kind of policing the galaxy and sorting out disputes how we thought they were, but it seems like they're literally controlling who can and can't have access to the Force.
They're protecting their
Massive
patch.
thing.
They're protecting their policing access to the Force, and it seems, some people have mentioned that the powers seem very up. You see Kamir do what he does, and these Jedi have clearly never come across anything like this. They've come across parlor tricks, essentially. It's one thing being a Guardian of the Whills. A Guardian of the Whills wouldn't last, you would imagine, wouldn't last long against a full-on Jedi attack. They'd hold their own for a bit, but they wouldn't be able to resist it. And they have a tap into the Force, but not to the level that a fully trained Jedi would. So it does, like you say, feel like they're guarding their own patch. Yeah, if that's the best way of putting it, because and clearly they're policing it, because I think I don't know. I need to go back and look into the canon history. And I don't think there's a huge amount of canon history before this, but so obviously in Legends we've had Sith Wars for millennia, So like there was always the Mandalorian raids, and they were, similarly, worried that, the galaxy was worried that the Mandalorians would rise again. We kind of see in the touches of that in the Mandalorian or Mandoverse stuff, but not to the level that they're a galactic threat. Certainly not that. But nevertheless, it just makes you wonder at this point in canon history, what the Jedi would know of the Sith, because it feels like that we've said this before. I keep doing this on screen. It feels like the Force is ebbing and flowing, and sometimes you're picking it up on a peak, and sometimes you're picking it up on a trough, and also because the Sith have been gone for such a long time, and clearly they have. But we know they've bobbled along underneath quietly, making their own plans, generational plans to return at some point, to the degree that most of the Sith that keep that flame going will never be out there in public. It's not like Maul appearing and never get to use their powers. No. So it makes you wonder, is the Force, for the most part, if the Jedi are the strongest and most formal, they're on Coruscant, they've got a temple, but they have contact with the Senate. I know the Senate's not a galactic Senate. It's a galactic Senate, but it doesn't cover the whole galaxy. We know there's massive regions of the galaxy. Shmi says it, and that's probably at a better point than here in that sense, that the Force is tapped into for, and I'm waggling the air quotes, good, not so much for bad. So when a Sith starts tapping into the Force, and do we know if the Force has a morality? We know about the Mortis stuff, and there's balance.
Yeah,
that's all about balance. So if there's a balance, you've got to treat good and bad as an equal scale. Yeah. So if a Sith suddenly starts tapping into the Force, I can only think of Palpatine in his room after Mace has been killed, screaming unlimited power. So a Sith or a Darksider or an adept tapping into that side of the Force probably has, crazy strong.
Crazy strong. Yeah, exactly. And also, who's not to say maybe that like Kamir hasn't been kind of created through some slight unnatural kind of means, because that's pretty much. Yeah. I mean, like, if you think about it, like Vader was created from Anakin, and was kind of almost imbibed with like the anger that Palpatine kind of lied to him through what, and the fact he killed Padme. Then then we've got
a life of slavery, which doesn't hurt.
Exactly. And then like you look at Rey, who was also like, some people say like overpowered, and she was created as a byproduct of like the Emperor's cloning program, and she was massively powered as well. So, again, and we've got Osha and May, who are clearly Force sensitive, but yet aren't very well trained, but yet strong enough to be able to do what they can do. And so if Kamir is probably a little bit older, which he looks to be, and might have been like some other kind of like dark force creation by the witches. Maybe that was their first attempt. If they wanted the twins, because they wanted maybe that binary thing, or maybe again, because if you look at all the symbology generally in witchcraft, but also actually what you see around the planet and around their little kind of culvert and that, there's lots of triads, lots of triangles, everything's in like threes and stuff, and you just wonder, maybe that's he forms like the corner of another triangle with the two girls.
Or are you thinking possibly that they were created to rectify a mistake they were created to be a force for good to take him down. If he was created
Possibly.
first, I like that
Yeah.
thought. I never thought that.
Yeah.
If he was created first,
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
it's all. I mean, this is a slightly off-topic thing, but on that, where they were, where the witches were, it was all women, clearly by choice. That was their decision. That's clearly how they wanted it. And if he came into that scenario, is
Yep.
he? It kind of feels like Savage Press. I don't know why. I'm just getting vibes of Savage Press. So it's that witchcraft. I don't know whether they call it specifically that in Star Wars,
Magic.
in
Magic with a
Galaxy.
K,
Yeah,
innit?
if that's the thing that would create him,
Mm.
then they push it one step further and they create, the two girls.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interesting thought. I mean, to my mind, I just wonder. I mean, like, this is something that me and Becky were talking about earlier on. Was actually like my theory kind of is that maybe he's going to turn out to be Ren. He hasn't got a name at the moment, and he takes the name Ren, and he becomes like the first Ren, and then and he is the one that all the other Wrens aspire to be. Therefore, again, it's kind of like it's connecting to the sequel trilogy, which will be quite a fun thing. But
It makes
it's
beautiful
not.
sense, though, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
if you looked at Kylo Ren without knowing that he wasn't a Sith, if he wasn't Darth Kylo, you
Yeah.
would assume he was Darth something, wouldn't you? You'd assume he
Yeah,
was a
totally.
Sith.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, isn't it? And that comes down to, our I guess our limited scope of what we've seen, our
Yeah.
view of the Force. And that's again, I think that's what's going to trip people up when they make these kind of like very kind of like, bold statements and underline stuff by saying this is definitely that and it's breaking canon. It's like, well, actually, it's because we've only seen it from a certain point of view or this perspective or whatever, trying not to kind of be cliche. But also, actually, one thing about Becky said, and actually, if you don't follow her on Instagram. I think it's what BK_cosplay. She said, and I didn't connect it because I wasn't really listening, but she was clearly hearing the Kylo Ren theme in the score from this episode.
Yeah.
Now,
Sander picked up on that. He was in the guide. He heard it twice apparently. So the Ren logic makes more sense to me than
exactly.
Sith.
Yeah. So I was like, that's fair enough. And I mean, again, the helmet, because the helmet it's got that kind of Kasumi kind of like joins in it and stuff. And like, his armor was pretty awesome because
It was.
going back to, I had to kind of dredge it out from like the memory banks, but ketosis, wasn't it?
Cortosis, yeah.
Ketosis is what they used they introduced it in Legends, but I think it started to make an appearance in like Dr. Afra comics. Like, didn't she have like a big sword, a Sith sword or something?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I forget what it was called, but yes, she did have a big sword. Yeah.
And I think that's wasn't that like a Renault sword or something? And I think that might have been like a nod towards John Null. But so that I thought was really cool because suddenly, like again, that's another aspect of combat that the Jedi haven't seen. Suddenly, like they're like he's headbutting their blades and the blades are cutting out.
That was mad.
Which is bonkers. I mean, like in terms of like how that actually looked on screen, it just looked awesome. And of course that's the thing is like because I mean I guess I was expecting somebody to go, oh my god, he's using ketosis, whatever, and to explain it, but they're like, what the hell?
What the heck? Yeah.
And so then suddenly it's like again, they've he's caught them off guard, off balance, as it were,
massively,
and they have to adapt. But as you can see, most of them don't, and most of them end up like on the cutting room floor. So. I mean, and like the whole kind of like pulling that Jedi onto the other like blade and stuff like that. It was really well orchestrated and stuff. So but I think for me the biggest surprise, I think, as we kind of really start to talk about, was probably the body count, just in general, but also the fact that like the two characters that I probably would have put money on surviving aren't going to survive or haven't survived. And obviously at this point, if you haven't listened, watched the episode, then why you listen to us?
Why you listen to us? Yeah.
Spoilers warning, which is about 15 minutes too late. Never mind. But my point is that like, we saw the death of both Yord and Jackie. Now, I applauded quite savagely at the death of Yord because I just kind of found him slightly a pointless character in some respects. I kind of get he's kind of like. His representation is meant to be of like the rigidness or rigidity of like the Jedi training, and kind of like he is embodiment of the hubris that has kind of been created through generations and generations of training the Jedi in a very kind of like inward looking kind of way.
Yeah.
But like it was a story logic of like, I'm going to try and wrestle you and I will kind of fight you to get you back to the ship. But then you get to, then like we get halfway and then Osha just turns around and goes, oh, we've got to go back and help them. And it's just like, it's just like one of those kind of like and frustrating story moments where it's just like, it didn't really need to like happen. It just felt like slightly lazy, like writing. And so, like, obviously, he gets his neck snapped, which again, like for Star Wars show, is quite a graphic thing to see, which I applaud. And I applauded that because I was just like, oh, that's amazing. And also, at the same time as I started applauding, I could literally hear like the millions upon millions of Yord hoarders cry out in terror that like their guy had just kind of like just had his neck snapped like a little bitch, and is lying on the forest floor, So I thought that was kind of like a cool one. And then, but the biggest surprise was Jackie, because
totally.
like I was sat there, and all the way through this like series so far, I've just kind of gone, well, she's kind of like she'll be the one survivor because she's she's a quiet one and she'll probably just escape. And I didn't really kind of give her too much thought, really. I mean, and to be honest, up until the beginning of this episode, I couldn't remember her name, So, and there's this part during the pre-titles kind of like catch up where she's talking to May and she's kind of like, she just sounds so like just kind of like you can like push her over with a daisy, and she's the one who's very focused around like it seems like the law and the regulations. Like she's tried to arrest May before, and even in this episode she's wrestling her to the ground like it's an episode of FBI or Law and Order, and she's trying to read her galactic Miranda rights and all the things that she's gone wrong. And so I just put bloody cuffs on her and get her out. And it's just like, but I mean, that's probably the process that she's been told. She's probably been told, if you arrest somebody, you've got to kind of tell them why they're being arrested. And it doesn't matter what they're doing and how much they struggle. You've got to tell them. And so like, she's trying to do that and not kind of like, get caught up in the limbs of like the dead Kalnaka who's kind of like slumped on the chair. And so then when she actually kind of springs into action, I was just like, oh my God, this girl can fight.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
It didn't feel like, sometimes it feels like they're speeding up the film and it looks a bit off. This didn't feel like that at all. It just felt like they were going at insane speeds. And when she came in, because there was pushbacks and Sol's fighting him, Sol actually gets the better of him briefly, doesn't he? Sort of pretty much beating him up and kicking him around the ring.
And that's hand-to-hand combat. That wasn't even with lightsabers.
No, but when Jackie came in and that little Fast and Furious fight happened, but then all of a sudden he broke the blade into sort of little Shoto daggers, Shoto sabers, and just boom, 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 1, 2, 3, kebab. I didn't see that coming at all.
No,
all the others, and that's, I kind of got to say, that's why I'm applauding this episode so much, because it proper caught me on the hop, because just like you said, and there's a piece at Entertainment Weekly today when Charlie Barnett and Daphne Kane have both said, oh, we knew that our characters died from, you're in this, do you want to come in this Star Wars thing? Yeah, you die really early. Oh, okay, cool. And they ain't in the flashbacks. So we've barely seen Kalnaka. I mean, in the now, we saw him shout at Scooby as Pip and the other guy on Kofar, and pretty much that was it. Next time we see him, he's dead in his chair. But we know there's loads of flashback stuff coming in a couple of episodes' time. So that's where you'll see the bulk of Kalnaka and again, probably Indara and Torvin and some of the other characters that went out really early. I'm fine with all that because we've come into this new era, and also because the High Republic, as you know from reading stuff, is pretty brutal. Loden Greystone going out, you would get attached to, he's the Qui-Gon Jinn of his era. Like you could kind of say that Master Sol is the Qui-Gon of this era, and they, Sol's still around. I can't imagine him lasting that long. I can't imagine this situation being brought up in the Senate I think all these characters are on the clock. The only people that are going to know are High Council people. And there's one thing that really struck me today. I'm watching Rogue One. You watch the scroll up for Star Wars, and you realise that there's that one line in the scroll up. The rebels were just when their first major battle against the Empire, they're stolen the secret plans of the Death Star, and that's John Knowles' pitch for Rogue One was basically that. You get a film out of it. The Acolyte to me is the scene right after Ki-Adi-Mundi says they haven't been a Sith for a millennia, and you literally see Yoda and Mace Windu kind of give each other the side eye. Like it just feels like this is the story of that.
The knowing,
There's that knowing look, and they're the High Council. You picked up on it last week. Yeah, we've seen some senior Jedi, but that's the High Council.
Yeah,
they're not involved in this yet. This is too many steps down the ladder yet, but it will get to. You can't imagine it won't get, especially after this. If they get off this planet in one piece.
Exactly, and I suppose that's the thing is like how many will have got off that planet. That's quite a high body count that you've got to go back and you've got to do the after action reports for and and everything else and it didn't look like they they took any of the bodies back for any kind of funeral burial or anything like that. They just kind of left them there, which is kind of a little bit again brutal, not even lightsabers. So
but it's probably what you say. It's probably if you want to use we've kind of used the police verbiage about how Jackie was trying to arrest May, which is quite pertinent. It's pretty much how she was and definitely how Yord would have been. But if they call it in, call the old folks home, as Ben said, then it's on record, isn't it? You think, what was the library lady in episode 2?
Jocasta Nu.
Jocasta Nu would be aware, and people of that ilk would be aware, and all of a sudden, it's out there then, isn't it? Oh my goodness, the Sith are back. What are we going to do? We haven't seen this for a millennia. Even Yoda wouldn't have seen it.
It would create a panic, you would think, or definitely some ripples in their Jedi of uncertainty about and then again, would that you would imagine, like I think they talked about in the prequels, would have to be discussed with the Senate. In the Senate,
yeah. And it's all politics, isn't it? You've got the Trade Federation here, not to the level they were in the prequels, but it just struck me as something you said, I don't know if it was last episode or the one before, about the Vatican having this mythical, legendary room with chapters of the Bible that never got out there, sort of stuff. And there's this history that's not seen elsewhere, that's locked away for whatever the reason is, but it's there. And you think in the Star Wars world, the Jedi doing and knowing and seeing what they do for 25,000 years.
Oh, the keepers, all that stuff.
Can you imagine? Yeah. And the Sith. I mean, Hitler was we learned this in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Hitler was a nut for the occult. And you think the Sith are generally a nut for the Star Wars version of the occult. They're always the Fermata cage. You mentioned Afra, the Fermata cage and Afra and all these things that you've seen the Sith use or try to use, or people use them to capture the Sith, but it gets turned around for their own advantages.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that it feels like that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, you're right. And also because like with the Sith, it tends to be about like prolonging the legacy or prolonging the life of the current Sith Lord.
Yeah.
Like you could probably imagine that actually the Jedi thinking from their perspective, okay, if we're going to have to go and like fess up to the Senate that there's some guy running around, potentially we think he's a Sith.
Yeah. Or
and
what we would call a Sith, yeah.
Exactly, we would call a Sith, yeah. But then you can imagine there'll be some kind of like trumped up little senator who would be like, well, we gave you basically like carte blanche to control the teaching of the Force just to ensure that this hasn't happened. So if this hasn't happened now, and you let somebody loose, how are you going to stop it? But B, how is this not going to happen in the future? And maybe we need to reconsider this arrangement or something like that. And suddenly Jedi funding gets cut, and their robes go from being white and gold to being more kind of beige, and kind of like slightly less quality fabrics and everything else like that,
But it did feel like that. I mean, Living Force, you see the Jedi in that, constantly repairing old stuff. There's not finances and new ships coming in. They're repairing the old ships. They're making do. It's more, like you say, it's more like a monk's life when they've got limited resources than a knight's life. When if they need a new steed, there's the horses there the next day. It's a different kind of vibe, isn't it, in that sense?
Yeah. And this episode is sponsored by 24 Hour Steeds. head to 24hoursteves.com and use the code FANFA for 15% off.
I need to set that website up now.
Yeah. But no, you're right, because that's it. Like there's definitely like say a Fall from Grace is kind of like it's the obvious choice, but they've definitely it is like they've had their funding cut on a kind of like a level, and they've had to kind of tighten their obies and their belts in a little bit just to kind of carry on and stuff like that. But I think that will be something that will, maybe again season 2 you might see that you might suddenly see this slight kind of like shift like in the costumes a little bit maybe or something, depending on what happens at the end of the series with that. So are you kind of thinking that like from next week's episode we're heading back in time again, we're going to do a bit of a flashback?
I don't see how we can't. I mean, there was enough. I think there was enough in the first 2 episodes to justify going back in the third. And now, in retrospect, it feels like a very smart thing that they did to do what they did in that episode. But now, I think the table is set now. We've lost most of the characters. We've got May, Osha, and Sol, and Pip, who I didn't think was going to make it at one point, but did. So you still got those guys, and Basil, of course, who's not a Jedi, but he's a cool character. But everybody else is gone. So you think, well, Venestra's got to get involved now. How can she not? She's the only other one that really you feel really knows the full extent of.
But even
of
that,
what's there.
she doesn't know, because she kind of she questions Sol after she sends him off on the mission at episode 4, just before he leaves, and she's kind of like, what really went on? So he's definitely
he's the linchpin, isn't he?
He is. He's a key to this whole mystery is based around him, and so you kind of feel like this is a character that once we find out actually what's happened, I think we'll see him in a different light. It might not necessarily be a good light or a bad light. It might just be more of a tragic light, for intents and purposes.
Hi, this is Dave Chapman, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
But you do feel like you've got to go back. I mean, we know from episode 3 that there's loads we never saw. Torbin Scar, the shots we've seen of Kel Naka sort of possessed. So we need to see all of that. But now we know from especially the prequel trilogy, that it's rare for the bad guys to lie. They don't tend to just say it. It's the Jedi that are ones that sort of fudge and obscure and use a bit of wordplay, if you like, to cover things, because they're tied into a political system. The Sith aren't, or whatever Khmer is. They're not tied into a political system in the same way. You get to the the prequel trilogy. There's a Separatist Council, like there's a Republic Council and all, a Jedi Council and Senates and stuff. They're all puppets of Palpatine. By this point, the Sith, that particular lineage of Darksiders, they've got all the pieces in play. But I think now you've got to go back to find out what it was when Khmer's absolutely prodding Sol, and his face just, he lost it, didn't he? Like you said, that was a brawl. He was just kicking the crap out of him. He didn't need the lightsaber.
He totally lost his cool. And I think, and that's again, it's a weird thing. If Osha wasn't there and kind of called him out, he would have totally have just finished Khmer. And that could be. We could look back in 10 years' time when we start still pushing for the Star Wars what if, and maybe that is another episode. What if actually Sol did kill Khmer on the planet and kind of give into his anger?
That just makes me think of that Next Generation episode, the one with Hugh the Borg. And there was that chance where Crusher had the chance to put the virus and send him back to the collective and wipe out the Borg, and her conscience as a doctor wouldn't allow her to do it. And years later you look back and go, wow, if she'd have done that, the Borg were eliminated. And you go back to that moment with, like you say, with Sol, and he could have took Khmer out, and he got him beat in that moment. And if he'd have done what that guy had just done to all the other Jedi, including Jekki, who's gone at this point, and Yord, then that could be a massive mistake.
That could be the thing that would basically just change. We could still be living in the old Republic. So
true.
That's interesting. So a couple of things that I really thought was kind of cool, but also kind of a little bit clunky. And I've always liked in this show that they've used a lot of wipes, which I kind of applaud because, but they seem to stick them in this one, like to move between different fight scenes.
I noticed that
didn't quite work. It was kind of like it kind of felt like somebody said, oh, I think we need a wipe, or and it's like, you don't need a wipe, just need to cut, because you're not jumping massive like distances or time and things,
you're going 20 yards that way.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, they got a hell of a lot of use out of that set, it looks like, because they've done two episodes, and it looks so much better lit, like darker, and obviously it shows up the lightsabers, which is kind of what you want, I mean, also it kind of it's more realistic. It's that kind of like, it's what we would call like a scene referred kind of shot, where basically the light that's being illuminated is, you can see it. It's not suddenly just from massive, great big floods overhead and stuff like that. So, I mean, lightsabers always look cool in the dark. It was no escaping. So, I think that was really good. And I mean, what was quite interesting, and obviously it's a bigger moment than maybe, like, again, it looks like on first hand, but the moment where May kind of flicks her hair and cuts her braids off, it had like this battle cry, kind of witchy kind of music and stuff like that, which kind of must symbolize something, like, either a transformation or a change of whatever. What did you make of that?
I do wonder, because May was so keen to run, and she'd made a choice, and this was kind of the ramifications of that choice. I wonder if she hadn't have made the choice to, oh, I'm done, and Kim's going, he'll kill you, and she's like, I don't care, I'm going. I just wonder, there's lots of layers to that aspect, and the haircut. People have picked up on the tattoo on the forehead. I think that's like a henna tattoo. I don't know if that's a permanent thing, or whether that's something that you would adorn yourself with. I'm not quite sure. Obviously, we know Osha's got the tattoo.
Yeah, she's got proper tattoo.
To an out on the lash. Yeah.
But like the one on the head seemed to appear when May was kind of like in the ascension ceremony. So either it's a scar, or it might be some kind of byproduct of, like, actually, something unintentional, even intentionally, that the mother kind of like does during that kind of ceremony, just kind of say, hey, you're part of the clan, because they all have that kind of henna-y stuff all over them and stuff like that. But I guess, like, you just don't, you could probably cover it with a bit of foundation and make sure your bangs don't kind of like flick over. So
true. But the two of them swapping, I think obviously now Basil's sniffed it out already. Basil's onto it, so you wonder how long he's going to last, because he's clearly onto her. So she's now, Sol's not himself. Sol's discombobulated. He's not himself. He's not the clear-headed or anything. Exactly. So she'll probably fall in for a fair long time. Kamir obviously knows what's happened, because he sees the tattoo. He knows that's not May, and you would imagine he's powerful enough to be clear-headed to know that anyway. So he knows that he's got Osha. Well, I still think he probably wanted her all along.
Well, he had the opportunity to, I guess, really just kind of like wipe her out while she was on the floor, because I don't think he really cared.
But he puts the blanket over, doesn't he?
Put a blanket over. So it's like, so again, so the whole point is, I guess, so when she wakes up, he's probably going to put on that slightly more kind of kindly voice and just try and kind of, I guess, in lack of better terms, seduce her towards the dark side.
But as much as you think that May is now infiltrated Sol, and by association, when they get back to Coruscant, the Jedi, Osha could have equally have the chance to infiltrate the Sith or whatever, the dark side of the story, of the equation. And because, again, you sense that Kamir was more invested in her than he kind of was in May. It was quick to do away with her. He's trying to kill her, and I think next week's going to be really interesting. 6th episode next week, so I think next week will be in the now again. It's just how I'm really curious to see how Sol explains this to Vinestra, and whether it does get escalated next week.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I think we've got a conversation on the ship between May and Sol, which then flashes back to 16 years ago, and that will probably be the bulk of the episode, I think, which is fine. So. And actually, again, it's kind of like, maybe they've kind of like they looked at the Andor kind of thing, and they've had 2 episodes and a flashback, and 2 episodes of flashback, whereas Andor was always this 3-episode kind of like blocks, and it was 2 episodes of tension and then 1 episode of release. So it might be something like that. They've kind of gone, let's just maybe kind of formulate it a little bit so it kind of will flow in a way. And like, I mean, the missus hasn't seen last week's episode, so I'm hoping either tonight or tomorrow we can just sit down and just watch episode 4 into 5, which I think will probably make it feel like totally much more worth it, you know. So because it kind of did feel like Bill's just they were like, right, okay, we're just gonna cut this episode in half and split it between the 2 episodes, rather than, you know, they probably could have had maybe a 50-minute episode, and it could have just been the whole thing, you know, so condensed down a little bit. So that is going to be next week's episode.
If you want to be part of the action, visit fanthatracks.com, or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, Fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely free. So no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, my friend, and everybody else. Thank you very much for tuning in. And obviously send us those listeners' questions or viewer questions, or just leave them in the comments, actually, by all means. So until next time, I guess there's nothing else for me to say other than may the Force be with you.